Okay, this is a real quick answer to a question on a recent video. I had a question slash comment. Please make a tutorial for OPENTOONZ nodes and After Effects specifically. It's so complicated. Okay. When you say After Effects, I think you mean post-production effects. You're not referring to Adobe After Effects. So what you're asking is, how do you work with nodes in the schematic view, and specifically, how do you do effects? Okay. Well, if you look at the schematic right out of the gate, what you have is the table, and here we've got column 1, which corresponds completely to, I should probably show this as the X sheet. Here's column 1. Now if I add another column by just simply drawing something, I just put a dot in there, okay? So now I'm going to go back to here. So I've got my palette, and I'm going to change the palette so I have the brush that I like. Okay, so now there's 2 columns, and lo and behold, if you go back to the schematic, you can see there's now 2 columns. Okay, so the standard schematic, when you open the schematic window, which is done, I use a hotkey. I mapped it to F3 on my computer, but you just go to this schematic. So what the schematic's showing you is, it's basically showing you a pipeline, if you will, that shows you the structure of your scene, and it also can show you signal flow through your scene. So if I go to column 1 and I draw a character, so I'm going to draw a relatively happy guy. I'm just going to make this about as stupid as I can imagine. Okay, here's Mr. Happy Guy, and now I'm going to go to column 2, and I'm going to draw a body for Mr. Happy Guy. I'm not going to bother coloring anything, and I'm going to make his arms look as dorky as possible because I don't want to take the time to try to articulate them or anything. Okay, I just want to have a head and a body. So you can see that by turning the levels on and off that we've got these 2 different pieces. Okay, so now we go back to the schematic and we say, well, if I wanted to rotate this guy's head, which, by the way, I'm going to just double check here. Okay, yeah, this one is the head, so I'm going to call that head, just for simplicity, so I know what I'm talking about here, and we'll call this bod. Okay, so in the real world, somebody's head is kind of growing out of their body. So if you were to take the head and connect it here to the body, you just changed the structure of your scene. And what that means is that if you were to use the animate tool now to, let's say, change the rotation of this guy's body, you can see that the head travels with the body. Now that's going to be easier to see if I change the center down here near his hips, which is where it would really be. Okay, so now here's Mr. Happy Guy. Now I can grab Mr. Happy Guy's head and rotate that separately. But because the head is now a child of the body, as you can see, because of this structure, we can set up these sort of parent-child relationships, and pretty much it's you know, it visually maps pretty straightforwardly to what you see on the screen. So obviously you could cut the arms apart, and you know, basically for puppet animation the schematic's real useful. Now, just so you know, if you were to use the what's this called? The skeleton tool. Okay, the skeleton tool lets you connect levels in the same way right here in the drawing view. I personally have always found it to be really clunky and difficult and kind of weird. Whereas if I set up the relationships here in the schematic, I come back here, and if I invoke the skeleton tool, all of a sudden those relationships work. There's a direct mapping to what goes on with the skeleton tool versus the structure you set up with the schematic. How might that be useful? Well, mainly in my case, I hardly ever use it, but if I was going to use it, it would probably be for inverse kinematics. Inverse kinematics means that now I can grab the body and I can kind of do things in reverse. I can drag the head around, and I guess, okay, I was wrong. The body would follow if there was a third element in the chain, but there isn't, so that's kind of a stupid example. Let's just make this all kinds of fun and add a third level real quick, just so we can illustrate inverse kinematics. Tell you what we'll do. Let's take his body, grab the S key, select his arm, cut it out of there, go over here, hit the B key. Actually, let's create the level first. Okay, and then hit the S key and paste it. Hello, S key, Control V. Okay, paste it back in. Okay, so now the following relationship is not going to make any sense at all, but for illustration purposes, you can see what I'm talking about. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to make let's make column 3, which is his arm, a child of the head, which again, that makes no sense, okay? Because if you were really dealing with such a character, you hit the animate tool. So just so you can see that you can move it separately, like so, his stupid looking arm, okay? But again, if you grab the body, because of the way everything is channeled through here and connected, if the body moves, the head moves. If the head moves, the arm moves. Again, this is very bad character construction. But coming back to the skeleton tool, now you can see what happens when I grab the hand. This is called inverse kinematics, where you can grab the thing that's at the end of the chain and move it around, and everything else sort of follows more or less naturally. Now, as you can see here in the real world, more or less naturally is kind of a relative term, but you get the idea. Okay, so now to get back to your other question. Your real question wasn't how do you set up structure with the schematic and nodes. The real question had to do with effects. So here's the deal. See this little thing down here? This little spot right here. Click that. Okay, up. You see that all that structure is gone now, because for post-production purposes, each level is feeding directly into the X sheet and then to the output. Okay, so there is basically zero relationship between the structure of how your levels are parented together versus the flow of effects. All right, so now if I wanted to, let's say, put a blur on this character, okay? Well, first of all, this is important. See this little eyeball right here? If you add some post-production effects, you will not see them in the viewport unless you're in preview mode. Okay? So I'll put this in preview mode, and then I'm going to go back to my schematic. And what I want to do is I want to blur the entire character. So now you want to think in terms of signal flow. If I only wanted to put a blur or some other effect just on his body, then I would click on this connector right here and insert the blur effect. Okay, and now I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to say let's make it a 10mm blur, and I hit enter, and now I can't see his body at all. Look at that. It's so blurred that you can't even see it. So let's make it a lot smaller blur. Okay, so now you can see it's blurred a little bit. Let's go ahead and make it 2 to sort of split the difference. Okay. Now you say, well, yeah, but I didn't want to blur just his arm. I wanted to blur everything. Everything in the scene. Well, okay. Well, you can just hit Control X to cut and here, just go paste insert and stick the blur there. So now you're going out of the X sheet, but before the final output, you're inserting the blur. And when you come back here, as you can see, the whole guy is blurred. Basically, that's all you need to know, because from here, it's just a matter of testing different effects and seeing what they do. Now, what effects, you ask? Well, there's a lot of them. Okay, and there's many of them that I have no idea what they even do. There's some that I use frequently, so I guess I'll end this video by saying the ones that I use the most often would be blur, or maybe directional blur if I'm trying to simulate motion blur. Image adjustment, I will do an adjust levels, which is lets you change the red, green, blue color in a shot, but really curves accomplish the same thing very, very flexibly. So if I stick curves in there and then double click it and come back here, so you can see it's a typical Photoshop style curves node, that lets you basically change the contrast of the scene. So if I were to go like this, you can see that nothing happens, but that's because it's not patched in yet. See this? So what you want to do is hit Control X here, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to paste insert, and now when I go back here, you can see that the contrast is really kicked up and yada yada yada. So so there are a lot of effects. There are a lot of effects. I guess the other ones that I use somewhat frequently would be something like the multiply INO, and the reason I like that one is because that's what I'll use for shadows. I'll draw shadows around my character and I'll go outside of the lines. But if I turn on clipping mask, when I do my preview, the shadow will be clipped to the edge of the character's body. Wherever the character's painted in, you'll see the shadow, but outside of that area you won't. So the clipping mask with multiply INO is a useful effect. Those are probably the main ones I use. For the most part, I don't do a ton of post-production in OPENTOONZ, but at least that should get you going so you understand it. Again, remember, the nodes are found in the schematic view, the schematic window, which is right there. And I would say don't forget this little button so that you remember that you want to be in the effects versus the stage schematic. The stage schematic, can't talk. Stage schematic is for structure. Effects schematic is for effects. And I guess the only other review point would be whatever you do with effects, you're not going to see, and you're going to go, why aren't my effects working? Why aren't they working? Something's wrong. Well, yeah, you have to preview it. So basically, you see the effects when you render. Now, if you really want to see the effects, you can work in this view and just pop open another window, like pop open a little combo viewer and put it in preview mode and maybe move it to another screen so you can have your cake and eat it too. So anyway, that's it. That's the quick tutorial. Hope you liked it and hope it was helpful.